The only good thing about being in the swamp is you get to sit in the dojo that Steve Bannon built. And that's where I'm operating right now in my Trumpomania T-shirt, because that's what it's all about.
That is Kash Patel. That's the man Donald Trump nominated to run the FBI. He's never worked for the FBI, but he does host Steve Bannon's War Room podcast a lot, where he loves to share conspiracy theories.
The Chinese, the CCP, helped fund portions of the Biden campaign.
Get the sergeant at arms to go out and arrest Merrick Garland.
They want everything in every way to rig this system, just like the censorship regime. We're going back to Wuhan, we're going back to COVID origins, and we're going back to another form of a mega virus that can take out China's enemies. They're in on it with the mainstream media, the Biden-Harris-Walz campaign, and, of course, the FBI.
Like so many guys in Trump world, Patel just can't stop talking, which, game recognized game. These folks are mostly made of podcasts at this point, and from the little I've heard, what he's been saying is pretty out there. Joining me now is someone who has spent a lot of time listening to those podcasts. Zach Beauchamp is a senior correspondent at Vox, where he covers democracy and the far right. His latest piece is titled, "I Listened to Hours of Trump's FBI Pick on Steve Bannon's Podcast. Oh, boy." Zach, thank you for doing this genuinely important work. I guess what's first your sort of top line about what you came away thinking about the qualifications and worldview of this individual?
Yeah, Kash Patel may or may not have significant experience with government, depends on how you assess his time in the Trump administration. What he does have is a very, very paranoid worldview. I think that's probably the best word to describe it. I mean, he is constantly drawing connections between one threat and the other, an external threat to American security and whatever problem he has with the Biden administration or Democrats at the moment, all of which circles back to a kind of personal threat against Donald Trump, who he sees as really the linchpin of the American Republic, at least in the way that he talks about things on this podcast.
You're right. The overwhelming impression is that Patel's a man whose entire worldview revolves around paranoid conspiracy theories, specifically conspiracies against both America and Trump, which for him are one and the same. I thought this was a really interesting observation. I'm reading the Beverly Gage Pulitzer Prize-winning biography of J. Edgar Hoover right now, in some ways prompted by what's going on. He says it's a specific kind of obsession that reminds me of the FBI's first director, J. Edgar Hoover, a man who infamously abused his power to persecute political enemies. Tell me more about that.
So Hoover had basically built his worldview after this kind of fear, a post-World War II fear, of foreign infiltration and of attacks on American soil. He was worried about, for instance, kamikaze attacks happening inside the United States after what had happened on the Pacific Front during the war, and he believed the Soviets are responsible. And this sense that the Soviets were infiltrating American government in order to execute these actual kinetic plots against the United States, in addition to whatever else the Soviets wanted to do, really defined what Hoover was concerned about and led him to see Soviet agents basically anywhere. And what Patel does is there's no one overriding threat like the Soviets, but he strings together a few different enemies, right? China at some points, Iran at other points, sometimes even, drug dealers bringing people across borders. And all of them are linked back in varying ways to the Democratic Party and domestic enemies, right? So you play that clip of him talking about China funding Biden. There's no real evidence for this, right? Like his argument is a report, I believe, I try to trace it back, that House Republicans had put out that suggested maybe there had been some foreign money going through Act Blue, the Democratic crowdfunding platform. That's not really good evidence to say China is funneling money to the Biden campaign. But it's important for him to make this argument because it creates a justification to be able to say, when I go after them as FBI director, right, it is different from when they went after me, which is what he believes happened when the government was under Biden's control.
Yeah, I want to play two clips here. One is about using the sort of model that he used when he was a staffer on the Intelligence Committee to essentially fight this media war through leaks and use of official documents that he says he wants to sort of export as a kind of model for fighting back against Trump's enemies. Take a listen.
This is how we won Russiagate. We not only used Congress, we used the White House. We used the power of educating the American public with the corruption author's own documents from FBI and DOJ. And it can be done. Steve, just think about that. We did that at one place, in the FBI, mainly, and a little bit of DOJ. Just think about what you can do if you do it all at once at DOD, at the CIA, at the NSA, at the DOJ, at the FBI, at Treasury, at State, and the list goes on.
Basically, the idea of using government documents in your possession for official purposes as a tool of essentially selective leaking for propaganda.
Yeah, I mean, his view is that the domestic enemy is literally the enemy, right? That there's not a meaningful distinction in many ways between a foreign threat and a domestic one. And so when you take that view, when you believe, he wrote a book that he called Government Gangsters. It's called Government Gangsters. He's hawking it all the time on these podcasts. And the argument of the book, it's very literal, right? The American government is a kind of mob operation that is directed at Republicans and Donald Trump that's designed to entrench its own power and keep the deep state in power personally. He even has a literal enemies list in the appendix of the book where he lists 50-odd people who he believes are part of this nefarious group of government gangsters, the deep state. And Patel believes that they have weaponized the state against Republicans, and the only way to fight back is to weaponize the state against them, right? And that doesn't mean, playing by the rules or within the normal legal bounds. It means doing whatever you need to do in order to make sure you win the political war.
There's another clip where he sort of promises to go after the media, whether civilly or criminally. This one has gotten a fair amount of attention. A threat I think I take literally, although this is clearly someone who wants to be a media figure. Give him like a 4 or 5 out of 10 as a broadcaster, but not terrible. Zach Beauchamp, thanks a lot.
Thanks, Chris.